If someone had told me a year ago that my life would be irrevocably altered by a mandatory corporate team-building exercise, I would have laughed. A dry, brittle laugh, the kind that lives in the back of your throat when you spend most of your time surrounded by the silence of aging paper and the hushed whispers of forgotten history. My world was a carefully curated collection of quiet routines. The precise angle of the morning sun through the tall arched window of the archives. The specific weight of the brass key to the rare book's room in my palm. The scent of dust, vanilla, and time that clung to my clothes like a second skin. It was a small life, a predictable one, and I liked it that way. Or I had convinced myself I did. Then there was Julian. He wasn't part of my curated collection. He was an invading force, a disruption of sound and presence in my cathedral of quiet. He worked in facilities, a man built of broad shoulders and solid silence, a stark contrast to the academics and researchers who drifted through my domain like ghosts. I knew the sound of his boots on the marble floor 2 corridors away, a steady, rhythmic tread that was utterly out of place, a drumbeat against the library's soft, papery heart. He was the one they called when a century-old pipe finally gave up, or when a lighting fixture in the high, vaulted ceiling decided to flicker into darkness. He moved with an economy of motion, a physical confidence that I, a man who felt most at home hunched over a desk, could only observe with a kind of detached awe. And I did observe him, from behind my tall oak desk, over the top of a medieval manuscript, through the gaps in the towering shelves. He never seemed to notice. His focus was always absolute, his brow furrowed in concentration, whether he was wrestling with a stubborn valve or carefully replacing a pane of glass. To me, he was less a person and more a piece of living architecture. Solid, imposing, and completely, utterly unreachable. We existed in the same building, but in different worlds. Mine was a world of footnotes and cross-references. His was a world of pressure gauges and wiring diagrams. The distance between us felt as vast and uncrossable as the space between a word on a page and the tangible thing it represents. I had constructed entire narratives about him in my head, of course. He was probably arrogant, I decided. That kind of quiet confidence had to be rooted in a certainty that he was better, stronger, more capable than the pale, ink-stained creatures he was occasionally sent to fix things for. He had a girlfriend, surely. Someone vibrant and loud. Someone who matched his physical energy. Someone who was everything I was not. These stories were a defense mechanism, a way to categorize him, to file him away on a mental shelf so that the strange, unsettling pull he exerted on my attention would have a logical explanation. It was just a misplaced fascination with an opposite. Nothing more. We never spoke. In 3 years, our entire interaction consisted of a few curt nods in a hallway. His were brief, almost imperceptible dips of the chin. Mine were probably awkward, jerky movements that betrayed the sudden frantic thrumming of my heart. My heart, a frantic, trapped bird inside the cage of my ribs, every time he passed. It was ridiculous. He was just a man who fixed things. But in the quiet landscape of my life, he was a mountain, a landmark I navigated my days around, always aware of his presence, even when he was out of sight. The barrier between us was solid, built of professional hierarchy, departmental divides, and my own towering walls of social anxiety. He was the physical world. I was the world of ideas. And never the twain shall meet. That was the status quo. Comfortable. Safe. Lonely. Then the email arrived. It landed in my inbox with the digital thud of a guillotine. Subject: mandatory annual team building and wellness retreat. My stomach filled with a swarm of angry bees. The memo detailed a 3-day, 2-night excursion into the wilderness. Camping, hiking, trust falls, and collaborative problem-solving exercises. It was, in short, my own personal custom-designed nightmare. My routine, my armor, was about to be stripped away, leaving me exposed and blinking in the harsh, unfiltered sunlight of forced socialization. I tried to get out of it. A sudden, mysterious illness. An urgent archival project that could not possibly wait. But the directive was from the highest levels of the university administration. Participation was not optional. The disruption had arrived, an unstoppable force, and it was dragging me out of my carefully constructed fortress. The bus ride to the state park was a low-grade torture of strained small talk and overly enthusiastic coordinators. I sat by a window, feigning sleep, my knuckles white as I gripped a worn paperback. I watched the city bleed into suburbs, then into the sprawling, indifferent green of the countryside. When we arrived, the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a smell so aggressively wholesome it felt like an accusation. We were handed our assignments. Tent pairings. I scanned the list, my blood running cold, praying for a quiet colleague from the history department, someone who would understand the mutual benefit of silence. And then I saw it. My name, Leo Vance, paired with his. Julian Cole. The world tilted on its axis. Of all the people, the one person I had spent years carefully observing from a safe distance. Now I was expected to share a flimsy nylon shelter with him, to sleep mere feet from him. The angry bees in my stomach went into a full-blown frenzy. I saw him across the clearing, effortlessly slinging a heavy duffel bag from his shoulder. He caught my eye. For the first time, he didn't just nod. He held my gaze for a fraction of a second too long, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. Resignation? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. My feet felt rooted to the spot. He was the one who moved first, walking towards me with that same steady, ground-covering stride I knew so well. "Guess we're partners," he said. His voice was lower, rougher than I had imagined. A voice accustomed to being heard over the hum of machinery, not the rustle of turning pages. "Looks like it," I managed to say in my own voice, a pathetic squeak. The forced proximity was immediate and overwhelming. He was taller up close, broader. The clean, metallic scent of his workshop was replaced by the smell of soap and the crisp outdoor air. It was all too much, too real. Setting up the tent was an exercise in excruciating awareness. Every movement was a negotiation of space. Our hands brushed as we untangled the poles, and a jolt of pure electricity shot up my arm. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. He didn't seem to notice. Or, if he did, he gave no sign. He worked with a silent, focused competence that I could only admire. While I fumbled with the stakes, tripping over guy lines, he had the frame assembled in minutes. He moved like he belonged here, in this world of dirt and trees, as much as he belonged in the world of pipes and wires beneath my library. I was the alien, the interloper. Later, during a guided hike, I saw him in a new light. The forest was his element. He pointed out a hawk circling high above, identified the track of a deer in the mud, navigated the steep, rocky inclines without a hint of exertion. I, on the other hand, was a disaster. My new hiking boots were already rubbing my heels raw, my breath came in ragged gasps, and I was certain every rustle in the undergrowth was a bear. I stumbled over a tree root, my ankle twisting painfully beneath me. I would have fallen hard if not for his hand shooting out, grabbing my arm. His grip was firm, steadying. Heat bloomed where his fingers pressed into my skin, a warmth that spread through my entire body. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning my face with a genuine concern that caught me completely off guard. "Fine," I lied, pulling my arm away too quickly. The loss of contact felt like a sudden chill. He didn't comment. He just slowed his pace, staying closer to me for the rest of the hike, his presence a silent, solid shield against my own clumsiness. That evening, around the mandatory campfire, I watched him. The firelight danced across the planes of his face, carving shadows under his cheekbones and highlighting the strength in his jaw. I noticed things I never could from my desk in the archives. A faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The way his hands, calloused and capable, were surprisingly gentle as he whittled a piece of wood with a small pocket knife. The weariness in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. He wasn't the arrogant monolith I had imagined. He was just a man, a tired man, who was probably as thrilled about this forced corporate bonding as I was. He caught me watching him. Again. This time, I didn't look away fast enough. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth before disappearing. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was something else, something that made my stomach do a slow, dizzying flip. Later, trying to navigate back to our tent in the dark, I tripped again. This time my ankle gave way completely. A sharp, searing pain shot up my leg, and I went down with a choked cry. Julian was at my side in an instant. "Now, what is it?" The use of my first name was a small shock. "My ankle." I gasped, the pain making my vision swim. Without another word, he crouched down, his movements swift and sure in the darkness. His hands, surprisingly gentle, probed the swelling joint. "It's a sprain," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "A bad one. Can you stand?" I tried. The moment I put weight on it, a wave of nausea washed over me. "No, alright." Don't move before I could process what was happening. He had scooped me up, one arm under my knees, the other securely around my back. I was lifted off the ground as if I weighed nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. I was in his arms. Actually in his arms. My head was tucked against his shoulder, my face pressed into the rough fabric of his jacket. He smelled of wood smoke and pine and something else, something uniquely him. The absurdity of the situation was staggering. Me, the archivist, the man of books and quiet corners, being carried through the woods by the silent, intimidating man for facilities. The power dynamic had been shattered. He was no longer just the competent one. He was my rescuer, and I was utterly, completely dependent on his strength. He carried me back to the tent and gently deposited me inside. The space felt impossibly small with both of us in it. He worked with a quiet efficiency, retrieving a first aid kit from his bag. He propped my foot on a rolled-up sleeping bag and began to wrap my ankle with an expert touch. "You should have said something sooner," he said, his voice low. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "I didn't want to be a bother," I mumbled, ashamed. He looked up from his work, his eyes meeting mine in the dim light of a small battery-powered lantern. "It's not a bother." The sincerity in his voice was a physical blow. He finished wrapping the ankle, the bandage snug and secure. His hand lingered on my leg for a moment, his thumb brushing against my skin just above the bandage. It was an innocent, almost clinical touch, but it sent a tremor through my entire body. He pulled his hand away, and the air between us crackled with a sudden, palpable tension. The world shrank to the thin nylon walls of the tent. Outside, a light rain began to fall, a soft, insistent drumming that isolated us even further. We were in our own small universe. Just the two of us, surrounded by the darkness and the rain. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a library. It was a silence filled with unspoken things, with the charged awareness of another person's breath in the small, enclosed space. My heart was a frantic metronome, counting out the seconds. I had to say something, anything to break the spell. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He just nodded, his gaze fixed on some indeterminate point on the tent wall. The silence returned, heavier this time. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the faint scent of rain on his clothes. I was acutely aware of every shift in his weight, every breath he took. And then he spoke, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. "You watch me." It wasn't a question. My blood turned to ice water. Caught. Exposed. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. "At work," he clarified, his voice still low and even. "In the library. You're always watching me." My carefully constructed world of detached observation crumbled into dust. He had seen me. He had known all along. The shame was a physical heat that flooded my face. I didn't mean to be creepy," I stammered, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes found mine in the dim light. That unreadable expression was back. "I didn't say it was creepy," he said. And then, the confession I never expected. "I watch you too." The air left my lungs in a rush. "What? You?" I whispered, incredulous. "You have this way of focusing," he said, struggling for the words. "When you're looking at one of those old books, it's like the rest of the world just disappears for you. You look peaceful, peaceful. No one had ever described me as peaceful. Anxious, quiet, reserved, but never peaceful. He saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. The rain was falling harder now, a steady roar against the tent fabric, enclosing us in a cocoon of sound and darkness. He shifted, moving slightly closer. The space between us dwindled from feet to inches. My breath hitched in my throat. This is it. This is the moment where everything changes. Leo, he said, and the sound of my name on his lips was a revelation. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before his fingers gently brushed against my cheek. His touch was tentative, questioning. The calluses on his palm were a rough, warm friction against my skin. It was the most honest thing I had ever felt. I leaned into his touch, a silent answer to his unspoken question. My eyes fluttered closed. His other hand came up to cup the back of my neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin there, sending shivers down my spine. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. And then his lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss. It was slow, hesitant, a discovery. His lips were soft, warm, tasting faintly of campfire smoke and rain. It was a kiss that asked more than it took, a gentle exploration of a new and terrifying territory. My hands, acting of their own accord, came up to rest on his chest. I could feel the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath my palms, a rhythm that was surprisingly calm, a stark contrast to the wild, frantic tempo of my own. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine. We stayed like that for a long moment, just breathing the same air in the close darkness of the tent. The rain was our only witness. I didn't know. He whispered, his breath warm against my lips. Me neither. I breathed back. And it was the truth. I hadn't known what I was longing for until this very moment. I hadn't known that the mountain I observed from afar could be this close, this warm, this real. The rest of the night passed in a blur of quiet touches and whispered words, a fragile intimacy built in the dark. We didn't do much more than kiss, but it felt like more. It felt like everything. It was a rewriting of all the stories I had told myself about him, about myself. It was a connection so profound, so unexpected, that it left me breathless. Eventually, lulled by the rain and the warmth of his body next to mine, I fell asleep. It was the first time in years I had slept without the familiar weight of my solitude beside me. I woke to the cold, a brutal, empty cold that had nothing to do with the morning air. The space beside me in the sleeping bag was empty. The tent flap was open, a gray, unforgiving light spilling in. Julian was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the lingering haze of sleep. I sat up, my sprained ankle throbbing in protest. I could hear voices outside. The forced cheerfulness of the retreat coordinators, the clatter of camp stoves. The world had returned. Our small, private universe had been shattered by the dawn. I crawled to the opening of the tent and peered out. I saw him. He was standing by the communal fire pit, a mug of coffee in his hands, talking to one of the other men from facilities. He was laughing at something the other man said. Laughing. He looked completely normal, completely unaffected, as if last night had never happened. As if he hadn't held me, hadn't kissed me, hadn't whispered my name in the dark. My heart, which had felt so full and warm just hours before, shriveled into a tight, aching knot in my chest. It was a mistake. Of course it was a mistake. A moment of shared loneliness in the dark, a temporary lapse in judgment fueled by proximity and rain. He was regretting it. He was embarrassed. He probably couldn't get away from me fast enough. The self-recrimination was a bitter tide, rising fast. I was a fool, a naive, romantic fool who had mistaken a moment of fleeting connection for something real. I had misread everything. I retreated back into the tent, the gray light feeling harsh and accusatory. The scent of him still lingered on the sleeping bag, a cruel reminder of the intimacy I had so stupidly believed in. My solitude, which had once been a comfortable fortress, now felt like a prison cell. But it was worse than before, because now I knew what I was missing. Now my solitude was haunted by the ghost of his touch, the echo of his voice. It was an absence, a gaping hole where he had been. The rest of the retreat was a special kind of hell. I used my sprained ankle as an excuse to avoid the final day's activities, holing up in the tent with a book I couldn't read, the words swimming meaninglessly before my eyes. Julian didn't come back to the tent until it was time to pack up. He moved with a brisk, businesslike efficiency, avoiding my eyes, the silence between us a physical weight. It was a crushing, suffocating thing. Every word I wanted to say, every question I wanted to ask died in my throat. What could I say? Did last night mean anything to you? The thought of his potential answer, a pitying look, a mumbled apology, was more than I could bear. So I said nothing, and he said nothing. We took down the tent, our movements synchronized from practice, but utterly devoid of the easy awareness we'd shared before. Our hands didn't touch. Our eyes didn't meet. We were strangers again. Worse than strangers. We were strangers who had shared a secret, and now that secret was a wall of shame between us. The bus ride back to the city was an agony of silent tension. He sat in a different row, his head leaning against the window, his profile a study in stoic indifference. I watched his reflection in the glass, my own face pale and strained. I had never felt so alone in a crowded space. The first day back at work was even worse. The familiar quiet of the archives, once a comfort, now felt like an echo of the silence on the bus, in the tent. I kept expecting to hear the sound of his boots in the hallway, my body tensing in anticipation. But he didn't appear. A week passed, a silent, agonizing week. I didn't see him once. It was as if he had vanished from the building, or was deliberately taking routes that avoided my section of the library. The latter seemed more likely. The hope that had flickered to life in the tent died a slow, painful death. The mountain had retreated back into the distance, shrouded in mist, more unreachable than ever. I tried to rebuild my routines, to find comfort in the familiar rhythms of my work. But everything was tainted. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty. The solitude wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. He had broken something open in me, and now I didn't know how to put the pieces back together. On the 8th day, I was reshelving a collection of 19th century botanical illustrations when I heard it. That steady, familiar tread. My heart leaped into my throat, a panicked bird beating its wings against my ribs. I froze, my back to the aisle, a heavy leather-bound volume clutched in my hands. Don't turn around. He's just passing through. He's here to fix a light. Don't turn around. The footsteps stopped, directly behind me. The silence stretched, thick with a week's worth of unspoken words. I could feel his presence like a physical heat at my back. Leo, my name. His voice. Quiet. Hesitant. I squeezed my eyes shut, my knuckles white on the spine of the book. I couldn't do this. I couldn't face the pity, the awkward apology. Slowly, reluctantly, I turned around. He was standing there, in a narrow aisle between two towering shelves of books. He looked nervous. His hands were shoved into the pockets of his work pants, and he wasn't meeting my eyes. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that was so jarring, so unexpected, it knocked the air from my lungs. He looked as scared as I felt. "Hi," he said, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. E whispered a buck. He started, then stopped, running a hand through his short, dark hair. "I'm not good at this, at what?" The question was out before I could stop it. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely at the space between us. Talking, he finally met my eyes, and what I saw there wasn't pity or regret. It was fear and confusion and something else, something that looked an awful lot like the longing I saw in my own reflection every morning. "I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "About the morning after, and this past week." I panicked. The confession hung in the air between us, as potent and unexpected as the one in the tent. "You panicked?" I asked, my voice small. "Yeah," he said, letting out a short, humorless laugh. "I don't do that. I don't feel that." He looked away again, his jaw tight. "Nothing like that has ever happened to me before." I didn't know what to do, so I did what I always do. I shut down. I ran. He took a hesitant step closer, closing the distance between us by half. It was stupid. and it was cowardly. And the last week has been hell, my breath caught. He had felt it too. The absence, the silence, the aching void. It wasn't a mistake, Leo, he said, his voice dropping, becoming earnest, intense. What happened in the tent? It wasn't a mistake for me. Was it a mistake for you? The question was terrifying. It demanded an honesty I wasn't sure I possessed. But looking at his face, at the raw vulnerability there, I found a strength I didn't know I had. No, I said, and the word was solid, sure. It wasn't a mistake. A wave of relief washed over his features, so profound it was like watching a storm cloud pass. Good, he breathed. We stood there for another long moment, the silence no longer a weight, but a space for understanding. I'm scared, I admitted, the words tasting strange and new on my tongue. Me too, he said, and a real smile, a small, genuine smile, touched his lips. So, what do we do now? The future, which had seemed like a long, gray, empty corridor just moments before, suddenly opened up into 100 different possibilities. I don't know, I said honestly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He held it out to me. Put your number in, he said. Maybe we can start with dinner. Somewhere not in the woods. Somewhere with actual chairs. The small, situational humor was so unexpected it startled a laugh out of me. A real laugh. It felt good. I took the phone, my fingers brushing his. This time, neither of us pulled away. The touch was a promise. A symbolic gesture that felt as significant as a key to a locked room. I typed in my number, my hands trembling slightly. I handed the phone back to him. I get off at 5, I said, feeling bold. I'll be waiting by the front entrance, he said. And just like that, the barrier was gone. Not shattered in a great, dramatic explosion, but dismantled, piece by piece, through quiet confessions and a shared, acknowledged fear. He left, and the sound of his boots receding down the corridor was no longer a disruption. It was the sound of a promise, the sound of a new beginning. The next few months were a study in domestic intimacy. Our first date was at a quiet Italian restaurant where we talked for hours, filling in the years of silence with stories of our lives, our families, our quiet, solitary worlds. I learned that his confidence was a shield, forged in a childhood where he was expected to be the strong, silent man who fixed things. He learned that my quietness wasn't aloofness, but a defense against a world that often felt too loud, too fast. We were two sides of the same lonely coin. Soon, he was spending more nights at my small apartment than his own. His large frame, which I had once found so intimidating, now seemed to fill my space in the most comforting way possible. He made it feel less empty. He made it feel like a home. Waking up became my favorite part of the day. There was no more morning after anxiety. There was just the quiet reality of him beside me, the weight of his arm draped over my waist, his slow, steady breathing, a comforting rhythm in the early morning light. We would make coffee together in my tiny kitchen, a clumsy ballet of two people still learning each other's movements. He'd lean against the counter, watching me with that same quiet intensity he had in the woods, but now it wasn't unreadable. It was full of an affection so open, so clear, it still sometimes took my breath away. We'd share meals, not in strained silence, but in a comfortable quiet, punctuated by shared smiles and easy conversation. He taught me how to fix the leaky faucet in my bathroom. I read him passages from my favorite books while he sat on the floor, patiently mending the spine of a damaged antique. Our worlds, once so separate, began to overlap, bleeding into one another until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find him standing by the window, looking out at the city just as he had looked out at the forest. The morning sun traced the line of his shoulders, the strong column of his neck. I remembered watching him from across the library, this man who I thought was an arrogant monolith, a creature from another world. He was a plot twist I never saw coming. He was the disruption that had shattered my routine, my solitude, my carefully constructed life. And in the wreckage, I had found not chaos, but connection. Not fear, but a bravery I never knew I possessed. He turned, as if sensing my gaze, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. The same smile that had once made my stomach flip with anxiety now made it settle with a deep, profound sense of peace. My life was no longer a curated collection of quiet, predictable things. It was messy and unpredictable, and sometimes still a little bit scary. But it was a shared life, and I wouldn't have traded it for all the silence in the world. He had been a mountain in the distance, a landmark I had only ever dared to observe. I never dreamed I'd get to know the landscape, to learn its hidden valleys and quiet strengths. The camping trip, the thing I had dreaded more than anything, had forced me off my well-worn path and into the wilderness. And it was there, lost and completely out of my element, that I finally found my way home.